Hello, my name is Juan Carlos Angulo Ochoa, and this is my video about what has been covered in the subject, assessment and testing in the classroom. The subject is divided in 4 different chapters. The first chapter is called Overview of Language Testing and Assessment. It starts by defining the concepts for evaluation, assessment, and testing. Then it states 5 important questions about the nature of the assessment: when, who, what, how, and why. Then it covers informal, formal, and self-assessment. Informal assessment is a way to collect information about students' performance in normal classroom conditions. Formal assessment has 2 main interpretations. One is when assessment is seen as an examination, and the other is a test that is commonly administered in class by a teacher. Self-assessment is when students reflect on his or her learning in order to improve it. Finally, the chapter covers summative and formative assessment. Summative assessment is that which aims to assess learning, and formative assessment are those which aim to assist learning. Chapter 2 is called Formal Assessment, and it covers the tests from forms according to purpose. It mentions that there are 3 moments in a course to apply tests: before, during, and after. Before the course, there is the aptitude test. During the course, there are placement tests, diagnostic tests, progress tests, and achievement tests. And finally, after the course, there can be administered a proficiency test. It explains every one of the mentioned tests, and it ends by covering the first, second, and third generation of tests. The first generation assessed the grammar translation method. The second generation assessed objectively on right on or wrong basis. And the third generation assessed both text and tags, which are authentic and that have a clear reference to reality. Chapter 3 is called Fundamental Principles of Testing. These principles were developed by West and describe the existing opposition between one or the other principle. The principles of language testing are competence versus performance, usage versus use, direct, indirect assessment, discrete point versus integrative assessment, objective versus subjective assessment, receptive versus productive skills, backward and forward-looking assessment, contextualized versus disembodied language, criterion referenced and norm referenced assessment. And finally, reliability versus validity. This chapter ends by stating the desirable test characteristics, which are utility, discrimination, practicality, reliability, and validity. Chapter 4, detail of formal, informal, and self-assessment techniques. Informal assessment, it is covered once again the definition of informal assessment and Harris' systematic observation to carry out effective informal assessment. Following Harris' investigation, the topic of band scales is covered from Harris' own very simple scale for speaking assessment to holistic and analytic scales. Then self-assessment is mentioned once more, making notice of formative assessment, self-help groups, placement testing, achievement assessment, and the work conducted by Harris and McCann with their action points. Finally, the chapter covers a series of techniques for objective and subjective testing, as well as checklists for communicative tests and practical proposals for the assessment of the 4 different skills. Thank you very much. This has been my presentation.